Now, some news from the world over. The big news of the week, President Donald Trump has canceled the planned nuclear summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Speaking from the White House on Thursday, he called the developments a setback for North Korea and a setback for the world. The president characterized a recent statement by North Korea as having tremendous anger and open hostility. Trump says tough sanctions and a maximum pressure campaign will continue until Kim Jong-un agrees to engage in constructive dialogue.
Hopefully, positive things will be taking place with respect to the future of North Korea. But if they don't, we are more ready than we have ever been before. I hope that Kim Jong-un will ultimately do what is right, not only for himself, but perhaps most importantly, what's right for his people, who are suffering greatly and needlessly.
And the Trump administration has begun the process of barring federal funds from family planning clinics that perform or refer for abortions. Known as Title X, the family planning program serves about 4 million low-income women, costing taxpayers about $260 million annually. The Health and Human Services Department proposal would restore a Reagan-era regulation. The nation's largest abortion provider, Planned Parenthood, which is also the largest recipient of Title X funds, would be denied those monies. And on Tuesday, President Trump rallied pro-lifers ahead of November's midterm elections, speaking at the Susan B. Anthony List's annual Campaign for Life Gala. Trump applauded the gains of the pro-life movement since Roe v. Wade, including the progress made under his administration, both on policy and in terms of court appointments. He noted that for the first time since abortion was legalized, the White House, Congress, and 25 state capitals are pro-life and Republican. But he warned that they must continue to show up at the polls to preserve those gains.
But every day between now and November, we must work together to elect more lawmakers who share our values, cherish our heritage, and proudly stand for life.
And the date has been set for the canonization of Pope Paul VI and Salvadoran Archbishop Oscar Romero. The Vatican announced this week that the two will be formally recognized as saints on October 14th. Paul VI oversaw much of the Second Vatican Council after the death of John XXIII. He also penned the landmark encyclical Humanae Vitae. This year marks the 50th anniversary of that historic encyclical. San Salvadoran Archbishop Romero was shot and killed while celebrating Mass on March 24th, 1980, just as the country's civil war was getting underway. He was an outspoken social advocate, and Pope Francis declared him a martyr in 2015. Also this week, Pope Francis announced the appointment of 14 new cardinals, 11 of whom are under the age of 80, and thus eligible to vote for the next pope. With the new appointments, 47% of the electors have now been appointed by Pope Francis, 59 in total. 47 cardinal electors were appointed by Pope Benedict, 19 by Pope St. John Paul II. Pope Francis has again passed over appointments from traditional archdioceses in Europe and America. Among the latest appointments are bishops from Iraq, Pakistan, Japan, Peru, and Madagascar. Here to give us his perspective on these stories and more is Archbishop of Kansas City, Kansas, a member and incoming chair of the U.S. Bishops' Pro-Life Committee, and he delivered the keynote address at the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast this week. Please welcome Archbishop Joseph Naumann. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Raymond.
Pleasure to have you back.
It's always good to be with you and your viewers.
Well, it's a delight to have you. I want to start with, you were here in D.C., and sadly, when you're here in D.C., they draft you right into the political, Archbishop, so I'm going to start there. The president this week spoke at the Susan B. Anthony List, a big pro-life gala, and he made this announcement about Title X funding. Listen.
For decades, American taxpayers have been wrongfully forced to subsidize the abortion industry through Title X federal funding. So today, we have kept another promise. My administration has proposed a new rule to prohibit Title X funding from going to any clinic that performs abortions.
Your reaction to this, Archbishop?
Well, I mean, I think what the president has done is absolutely correct, and I think he should be applauded for this, regardless of what you might think about him on other issues.
Yeah.
He has been very true to his promises that he made before the election in terms of pro-life, and this is a bold, huge step to defund essentially Planned Parenthood, and he's not afraid of the pushback, as many people would be.
I have to say, I have been amazed, and I know there were a lot of people, many in that room when he was speaking, who did not support his candidacy, don't support him now. They're uncomfortable with the, look, here was a guy, Upper West Side, the playboy real estate baron. Nonetheless, you have to step back and say, there has never been a more pro-life administration in Washington. Do you see a reluctance, even among some in the episcopacy perhaps, to give him credit for those things because of that background?
Well, I mean, we always have to be careful about being partisan in what we do, and so we're not out to support particular candidates. But I think when our public officials do something that is worthy of praise, they deserve to be praised for it. And I know, regardless of what you may think about what his inner convictions are, the important thing is what his actions are in office, and his actions have been very, very good in terms of the pro-life issue.
Well, none of us can read a public figure or anybody's heart, but something has clearly, I have to say, I have stood back shocked listening to the lighting of the Christmas tree address, or the other day when he quoted scripture. You wonder, where is this coming from? But something or someone is clearly guiding him down this path, and he's embraced it. And as you said, there's a lot of pushback, a lot of it, even from within his administration. So the fact that he has stood so firm has been amazing to watch, really.
Yes.
You were on the Religious Liberty Committee of the Bishops' Conference.
Right.
What, in your mind, are the gravest threats the church faces today out there?
Well, I think religious liberty is at the top of that list, and particularly this effort to really marginalize the church within the culture. And particularly we've seen this, like in Kansas, we were just successful in passing this Adoption Protection Act, which was a preemptive effort to try to preserve Catholic charities from being able to do adoptions.
Wow. Because they wanted to, there were some who were trying to push you all out of the business.
Well, what happened in Massachusetts, Illinois, and D.C.
Yeah.
So we felt this was a protective step. Now, it was a huge battle even to get it passed in Kansas. But that's just one indication. Or you see in California where they're trying to make the Catholic hospitals perform abortions. So it's an effort to really either get the church to conform
or to give up its convictions.
Right, or to be pushed to the margins, no longer able. One of my concerns is that eventually this will attack our schools even. And because of our orthodoxy on issues like marriage, like the sanctity of life, that they'll eventually say, well, they're teaching hate. And that's how we're being
that's
postured.
the nomenclature,
Yeah. So I think our people need to wake up to this, that we really have to push back strongly and defend this, which is the first of all liberties, really religious liberty. It's the first of the Bill of Rights.
Well, and many people, I wasn't even aware of the Kansas battle. I know Archbishop Chaput in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. They just sued the city because the city is trying to force them out of the foster care assignments, saying you won't send these children to LGBT couples, and therefore you're violating city ordinance. So you should stop doing referrals.
Right.
So they're suing over it. We'll see how far they go, but it clearly is a battle here between rights,
right.
And we'll see where the courts come down on it.
And, I think the American public in general has really been deceived on this. I mean, the run-up to the court decision on same-sex marriage, for example, said, well, this doesn't affect you. It's not going to impact you. Let same-sex attracted couples marry. But we see how quickly that's changed. We see the same thing in the pro-life area. Our opponents for years called themselves pro-choice, but now they're trying to coerce the church into having to be complicit in the abortion industry. So there's a lot of deception out there. I think not just Catholics, but all people of faith and sincerity need to awaken to this and really protect this fundamental right of religious liberty.
I have to talk about the big story of the week. Pope Francis talking to one of these Chilean sex abuse victims, a gentleman we had on the show here, Juan Carlos Cruz. He claims that when he went to speak to the Pope said, and I quote, "You have to understand that God made you this way, and He loves you, and the Pope loves you, and you have to love yourself." Now, Juan Carlos Cruz came out and said he's a gay man, and that the Pope is saying, God made you this way. Your reaction?
Well, first of all, it's a private conversation. We don't really know what the Pope said. We know what Juan Carlos has said he said.
Yeah.
So I think we have to be really careful about that. And then I think you have to look at the full context. What the Pope was focusing on is God loves you. When you get to the phrase, God made you this way, I think that's problematic. First of all, because I don't even think the science at this point supports that. We don't know that there is any biological, nobody's found a gene that's the gay gene, although there's been a lot trying to discover it. So I think this is, the Pope has so many gifts, and he's out there speaking in many venues, and I think whether this is an accurate thing that he said or not, but it doesn't. I don't think we can embrace that part of it, that God made you this way. And even if there is at some point, if we can say there's a biological reason, there are many defects that we have to say, well, God made you with cancer, God made you with diabetes.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of imperfections in our human condition right now. And so to say that, I just think it's an unfortunate way of phrasing it.
Yeah. I want to play this for you. Over the last few years, Father James Martin, a very prominent Jesuit, he's written a book, issued a new version of it, and has really been out front in trying to build a bridge, in his terminology, between the church and the LGBT community. He reacted to the Pope's comments this way. Listen.
Well, the Pope is saying God made us gay, and psychologists and psychiatrists and biologists all agree, and if you talk to LGBT people, that's the way that they feel that they were born. I often ask straight people, when did you decide to be straight, right? So it really is, we have to understand, not a choice.
Your reaction to that?
Well, again, I think, first of all, the science doesn't agree with it. But it's complicated. When did a person, some people from very early in their life experience same-sex attraction, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that's in their DNA. I think very early on we're affected by different things that happen to us. So whether it's biological or whether it's a behavior that's learned in some way, but perhaps at a very, very early age, regardless, the people feel the way that they feel, and I think we have to respect that in a sense, but that doesn't mean that that the behavior becomes right. And I think that's the important thing to understand. We're all, and the Pope has been strong on this, we're all called to chastity. Whatever our sexual orientation may be, we're called to live a chaste life. And that's really the way to happiness. I think the whole cultural lie here that surrounds this is that you have to be sexually intimate to be happy. And if that were true, we should be the happiest culture in the world.
Right, exactly.
But it's not true. I mean, we have these epidemics of depression. So this whole lie that you have to be sexually active to be happy. Now, do you need friendship? Do you need to be loved? Absolutely. And I think this is what the Pope is really trying to say, is we need to love those with same-sex attraction, but it doesn't mean that we endorse the behavior.
My concern, just as from a journalistic perspective, is we've stopped talking about the Chilean abuse crisis and whatever corruption may have happened there. We just had an entire bishops' conference resign last week. We're not talking about that. Now we're talking about gay rights, which seems to me it's almost a shell game here. And as a journalist, I'm not so sure I'm happy about that course of events. People want to talk about gay rights, that's fine. But in this instance, the focus should remain on what corruption was in play, who knew what when, and what is the Pope doing to alleviate it. That is where we should be really focused so it doesn't happen again, with a full heart toward those victims and the potential victims that may be in the same diocese. So that's just my read on the situation. I also have to ask you about this. In the Wall Street Journal today, there was a piece that the headline was, "The Catholic Church's looming fight over same-sex blessings." They are suggesting in this piece that in Belgium, in Germany, bishops are allowing their priests to bless gay unions. Is that something we should be doing in the United States? Do you see this proliferating?
Yeah. Well, I'm not knowledgeable about what's happening in Belgium or Germany, but no, we can't bless something that we believe is basically disordered. And can same-sex people have beautiful friendships? Absolutely. But this whole notion of a simulation of marriage, or whatever you might call it, that we bless that. No, it's not. We can't bless something that's not doesn't comport with morality. So I think it's a. I don't think it's an opinion that's going to prevail in the church.
Yeah, you said last year in an interview, you were quoted as saying that Pope Francis's job, quote, isn't to make a bishop's life easier. And yeah, that would seem to be true in this sense. The Pope seems to be liberating or empowering the local church to make decisions once reserved for the universal church in Rome. In the sense that on this gay marriage question, the blessing of these gay marriages, it seems we're kind of letting it go on. Rome isn't weighing in and saying one way or the other whether this should be going on in Belgium and in Germany. We also have this intercommunion debate in Germany, where the German bishops decided they will allow spouses, non-Catholic spouses of Catholic men or women, to come forward and receive communion if they believe in the truth of the sacrament. Now, what happens if that's allowed to continue in Germany? Let's say the Pope has decided, he's basically sent it back, remanded it back to the bishops and said, you all figure this out. Let's say they decide to go with this. What does that mean to the church in America and Canada and South America and Africa? Can you have one church in one country allowing communion in this way and bar it in other places?
I don't think personally, and I'm glad it's not my responsibility, I'm not the Pope, but I don't think it's a good way to go about forming policy in the church. And I think an example of this would be in the United States when we did this with the Holy Day of the Ascension, where we left it up to provinces. But once the province next to you decided they were going to
shift it off of Thursday?
Yeah, it becomes very difficult. So in a sense, it becomes the lowest common denominator is what prevails. And so I think that's the danger of this, of letting nations experiment. I think there does need to be some oversight, or else we lose that hallmark of the church, which is unity. But I think God bless the German bishops, but I don't think the church in Germany is something that we want to imitate. No. It's anemic right now. And I mean, we've seen so many mainline Protestant churches go down the same route, and first, it's not healthy for the church, but it's not true. I mean, we have to stay to our true convictions.
Yeah, no, as I said last week on the show, practice becomes doctrine. It doesn't matter if you change the doctrine or not. Once you allow things in practice, that becomes the lived faith. That becomes the lived doctrine, if you will. And you can't have a divorce between the two. They must mirror each other, or you lose the one. I mean, people would think Catholics, of all people, should get this. A people of symbols and signs, when you disrupt those signs and symbols, or they're counter-programming what you believe, or at least what's on paper, that's problematic. And I think you open that door when you allow something like intercommunion, it would seem to me.
Right. I mean, I think we have to put this in the bigger context, so Raymond. I think the Pope is one that he's out there, and he in some ways he's a media person's dream, because he's very accessible, and he speaks not in as precisely as previous popes have done. So, and there's been a lot of good that's come from that. You know, frankly, he's attracting people to the church, or opening their hearts and minds possibly to it. So, but I think there's a real downside to this, and I think we have to look at that.
Last year, you severed terms, your archdiocese did, with the Girl Scouts, because you said they were no longer compatible, a reliable partner in forming young people. Given what we're seeing now in the Boy Scouts, are you comfortable with having that association between your archdiocese and the Boy Scouts?
Well, I mean, I think the Boy Scouts, their latest action of opening up to girls, I mean, as a church, we don't really have a policy against that. I mean, we have coeducational schools.
Sure.
So, I mean, that's not necessarily something that troubles me. What would trouble me is what we saw in the Girl Scouts, where in their curriculum they were holding up individuals like a Gloria Steinem, or like the founder of Planned Parenthood, these as being heroic figures for young women to imitate. I haven't seen that in the Boy Scouts currently, and it's kind of interesting. The Girl Scouts feel threatened by this, and if we hope that the Boy Scouts will remain true to the principles that have been the foundation of Scouting, but well, I think the jury's out on that.
Before I let you go, we should talk about the prayer breakfast. You were here to speak at the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast. What's the importance of this event, and why did you feel called to come and address it?
Well, you know, I think it's good that leaders within the church get together to pray. That's always a good thing. And I think particularly here in D.C., to bring together some of the leaders within the Catholic community, both in public life and within the church, is a good thing. So it's always a good thing. My tact at the prayer breakfast was really to talk about, I think, the most fundamental crisis. We have all these crises that we can legitimately talk about, but the biggest one is about faith and the loss of a sense of God. That's, you know, Pope John Paul II, in his encyclical, The Gospel of Life, spoke about that. Once you push God out, then man becomes just a thing among things. And so, and we see the data, the troubling data of how many, the rising demographic of atheists, and then this rising demographic of people that will describe themselves as spiritual but not religious. And that can be a code for the new paganism, where we're making God in our image rather than a God who reveals himself to us. So I think the most important problem, and if we get God in the right place in our life, then these other things
would
fall
fix
into
themselves.
place. Right.
Archbishop Naumann, thank you as always
Thanks.
for being here. Hope you'll come back soon.
Sure.
Thank you.